Jason had just gotten out of a long, bitter breakup and was desperate for a change of scenery. So when he found a listing online for a cheap one-bedroom apartment in the city, a miracle, considering the prices, he didn't think twice. It was in a building he'd never heard of before, tucked between two office complexes on a street that wasn't even marked on Google Maps. The photos looked real enough. The price? Suspiciously low. But it had a skyline view and came fully furnished. The landlord had messaged back quickly and seemed normal, if a bit rushed. "If you want it," he said over the phone, "just come by. I'll leave the key for you at the front desk. No paperwork needed right now. Just bring the first month's rent in cash." It should have set off alarm bells. But Jason was too tired, too eager to start over. He packed his things that night and drove across state lines the next morning. The building stood exactly where the listing said it would be, though it didn't look quite like the pictures. Older, dingier, 5 stories tall, but somehow looked shorter. The entrance was a rusted black door with no markings, no number, just a single red light above the frame. He buzzed in. No answer. But the door was already unlocked. Inside, the lobby was silent. The furniture was covered in plastic, and there was a faint buzzing, like old fluorescent lights. A small desk sat at the back, unmanned. But just like the landlord promised, a key was there with a note. "For B, welcome home." Jason rode the elevator up. It was slow, claustrophobic, the kind with a rickety gate and a faint, stale smell. When the doors creaked open onto the 4th floor, the hallway was dimly lit, the carpet threadbare. He walked until he found Forbid.it was already open. The inside of the apartment, though, was perfect, just like the photos. Clean, cozy, a strange blend of modern and vintage, like it had been frozen in time. He stepped in, dropped his bags, and for the first time in weeks, felt a strange kind of peace, like the apartment had been waiting for him. That night, he slept harder than he had in months. But in the morning, when he went downstairs to grab coffee, the lobby was gone. There was no front desk, no furniture, just an empty concrete room with exposed wiring, torn wallpaper, and a flickering light overhead. Even the elevator looked different, like it hadn't worked in years. Panicked, Jason ran outside. There was no building, but he was standing in an alley. Behind him, nothing but a blank concrete wall. No door, no red light, nothing. He turned around, heart racing, and tried to retrace his steps. Was he dreaming? Sleepwalking? Had he come in through another entrance? But the alley was narrow, hemmed in by tall buildings on either side. No windows, no doors, no signs, and no one had seen him arrive. Even the cab driver who dropped him off? That ride had vanished from his phone's history. He returned to the spot where the entrance had been. He pressed his palms against the wall, felt around for seams or hinges. Nothing, just cold concrete. When he finally pulled out his phone to call the landlord, the number didn't exist. .no records. No listings. Not even the original ad. It was like the apartment for B had never been real. But here's the thing. His bags were still upstairs. So he went back to the alley, back to the spot. And in his pocket, he still had the key. And when he held it up to the wall, he heard a click. Jason stood frozen, hand trembling, the old brass key still pressed against the concrete wall. He was certain, absolutely certain, he'd just heard a click. Not a scrape, not a trick of the wind, a lock disengaging. Then, like breath on glass, a faint outline shimmered across the wall, an almost invisible door frame, just tall enough for a person to slip through. No handle, no hinges, but the keyhole pulsed with a dim red glow, like something alive. He stepped back. This wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. But his bags were inside, and something deeper, a compulsion he couldn't explain, was pulling him forward. Against every instinct, Jason reached out again and turned the key. The wall peeled open like a mouth that it didn't swing or creak. It simply split, revealing a narrow hallway behind it. Dark, silent, but familiar. At the far end, faintly lit by the buzz of a flickering ceiling bulb, was his apartment door. For B. Jason's heart pounded in his ears. He took a slow step forward, and the wall sealed behind him. The hallway wasn't quite the same as before. The lights blinked in strange, rhythmic patterns. The wallpaper looked older now, water damaged and peeling, revealing some kind of blackened wood beneath. The air was cold, but not in a natural way, like the building itself was holding its breath. When he reached 4B, the door stood open once more. Inside, everything was where he left it. His bags, his shoes by the door, the coffee mug on the counter. But the windows were now blacked out, as if night had fallen inside the apartment, even though it was broad daylight outside. But he checked his phone, that no service, that no Wi-Fi. No signal. The screen flickered briefly before returning to normal. The time showed 3:17 p.m., the same time it had said 20 minutes ago that he was stuck. Jason sat on the couch, trying to calm his thoughts. Maybe he was hallucinating. Maybe this was some psychotic break brought on by stress. But when he stood and looked in the mirror above the sink, he gasped. The reflection wasn't right, he could see himself. But behind him, in the mirror only, was a figure standing just inside the apartment door. Tall, pale, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned bellhop uniform, crimson and gold trimmed. But when Jason turned around, nothing was there. When he looked back, the mirror was clean again, that he laughed nervously. "Okay," he whispered. "I'm losing it." He walked to the bedroom, intending to lie down and sleep it off. But when he opened the door, it wasn't his bedroom anymore. IT was a long, windowless hallway lined with doors. Each one had a number on it, but none were familiar. 5F, 6E, 7B doors that shouldn't be on the same floor. No apartment building was laid out like this. Jason tried to shut the door, but it wouldn't close. He stepped through, and the hallway stretched. The farther he walked, the longer it seemed to grow, the numbers on the doors becoming stranger. Symbols, letters from no language he knew. He tried one of them, just to see that IT was unlocked. Inside was a room the size of a cathedral, cold, vast, empty. But in the center of the floor was a table, and on that table was a photograph that IT was him, standing in front of the apartment building, smiling, holding the key in one hand and a suitcase in the other. But the background wasn't the city, that IT was void, like he had stepped out of existence itself. And underneath the photo, written in looping red ink, were the words, "You are exactly where you were meant to be." Jason backed out of the room. He ran. He didn't care about the layout or logic. He ran until he was breathless, until the hallways blurred together. And then suddenly, he was back inside 4B again. The door behind him clicked shut, and this time it locked. Jason sat in silence, every nerve on edge. The door behind him had locked on its own. No keyhole, no knob, just the finality of being sealed in. He could still hear faint noises through the wall, whispers barely audible, like someone speaking in another room, or inside the walls. He stood up, walked to the window. And again it was black, like someone had painted over the glass from the outside. He tried scraping at it with a spoon. Nothing. Not even a scratch. Then he noticed something that on the living room floor, just beside the coffee table, a footprint. Wet, as if someone had just stepped out of a pool of water. Only Jason hadn't been near any water. He followed the prints. Slowly, they trailed toward the hallway that as he moved, he could feel the air change again, like walking into a freezer. The hallway lights dimmed, even though he hadn't touched the switch. The bathroom door creaked open. Jason paused, took a deep breath, then slowly stepped forward and pushed the door open the rest of the way. The bathroom mirror was fogged, but the water in the sink wasn't running. He wiped the glass and stopped cold. His reflection didn't move. Jason staggered back. The reflection just stood there, staring at him with a blank expression. And then it smiled. A slow, knowing grin that Jason's heart hammered in his chest. He turned to run, but suddenly the lights cut out completely. Total darkness. Then the whispering began again, closer now, right behind his ear. Words he couldn't understand. A language that didn't feel like it belonged in this world. He bolted toward the living room and stopped that a woman was standing there, drenched. Long black hair stuck to her pale face. Her eyes were wide open, but entirely white. She wore an old-style housecoat, the kind from the 1960s, and in one hand she held a dripping photograph. Jason didn't move, couldn't breathe. The woman opened her mouth, and instead of words, water poured out, flooding the floor. Black water. It smelled like rot and rusted pipes. The photo slipped from her hand and floated toward Jason's feet. That IT was a picture of him again, But this time, he wasn't smiling. He looked terrified. Behind him, in the photo, was the woman. Jason turned and ran for the door. To his shock, it opened. But when he stepped into the hallway, it wasn't the hallway anymore. It was the lobby of the building, but not as he remembered it. It was abandoned. The furniture was covered in white sheets. The walls were cracked and peeling. Dust floated thick in the air, and all the light fixtures were broken. And at the front desk sat a man, old, gaunt, in a faded concierge uniform. He looked up as Jason approached. "You shouldn't be here," the man said quietly. Jason's voice cracked. "I live here." "No," the man said. "You were never on the lease." He reached under the desk and pulled out a clipboard. That on it was a list of tenants, typed names, all scratched through. All except one. The last name on the list, Jason Myers. But instead of an apartment number, it simply read, "Void." Jason backed away slowly. "I need to get out," he whispered. The old man shook his head. "No one leaves," he said. "Once you're in, you're always in." Then the phone on the desk rang. The concierge picked it up, listened, nodded once, then stared directly at Jason and said, "He's ready now." Jason turned and ran for the door, but as he reached out, the door vanished, replaced by solid concrete. Trapped, the lights flickered. Then, somewhere deep in the belly of the building, a bell rang. An elevator, opening, and Jason could hear footsteps coming up the stairs, slow, heavy, purposeful, that he wasn't alone anymore. Jason pressed his back against the cold wall, heart racing. The bell had rung again, once, then again, twice, and with each chime, the air felt heavier, like it was being pressed down by something ancient, unseen. The elevator at the far end of the lobby creaked open. It was pitch black inside, but Jason could make out a shape. Tall, motionless. Something stood just inside the doors, staring. It didn't step out. It waited. Jason couldn't move. His body screamed to run, but something deeper, some primal instinct, told him not to turn his back. Then, the thing in the elevator spoke, but not in words. It whispered directly into Jason's mind. "You open the door. You don't get to leave." Jason clenched his eyes shut and shook his head. This isn't real. This isn't happening. The old concierge was gone. No sign he'd ever been there. Jason turned and ran, not toward the elevator, away from it, back down the hallway, back toward his apartment. He didn't care if it wasn't real, or if it never existed. It was his. It was all he had left. But when he got there, apartment 6B wasn't there. The number skipped. 6A. 6C. 6B. He stepped back, confused. This couldn't be happening. He looked down at the welcome mat. Nothing. He touched the wall where the door should be, and his hand went through no sound. No resistance. Just an empty space disguised as a wall. He pulled back sharply, breathing hard. Behind him, the elevator dinged again. Third chime. Jason turned. The hallway had changed. It was longer now, much longer, with doors on either side that hadn't been there before. Old doors, scratched wood, rusted handles. Some of them opened slowly as he walked by, even though no one touched them. And from behind those doors, he heard whispers, familiar voices, his old friends, his father, his ex-girlfriend, all long gone, all long out of his life. Then his own voice, "Jason," it said. He froze. "Jason, come in. It's safe now." The voice came from behind a door marked 6B. He stared. It hadn't been there seconds ago. He reached the handle, and the door swung open on its own. Inside, the apartment was perfect, clean, lit, normal. His couch, his things. His phone was on the coffee table, buzzing with a notification. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. It was like nothing had happened. Jason stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Relief flooded his body. He was back. It was over. He laughed. A shaky, nervous laugh. But real. He picked up his phone. No signal. No apps. Just one notification. Move-in confirmed. Permanent residency established. Then the lights flickered, and his phone went black. He looked around. The photos on the wall were different. One showed him standing in the apartment, but the background wasn't his furniture. It was that of an asylum room, cold, sterile, with padding on the walls. Another showed him asleep, but something towered over his bed, a shadow with eyes that glowed faintly red. Jason stumbled back. The apartment wasn't the same. The walls now throbbed, pulsing slightly like they were breathing. The floor felt soft beneath his feet, like flesh that he tried the door, locked that he looked out the window, still black that he screamed, punched the walls. Then, the TV turned on by itself. No signal. Just static. Then a face appeared on screen, his own, but gaunt, hollow, pale. His reflection on the screen blinked and spoke. "You live here now." Jason dropped to his knees. He wasn't sure if he was still alive, if this was some limbo or a nightmare or death, but he knew one thing for certain. No one moves into apartment 6B till they are moved there. Jason didn't know how long he'd been trapped in the apartment. Days? Weeks. There were no clocks. No sunlight. No sleep. When he did close his eyes, he dreamed of things that couldn't possibly exist. Rooms made of teeth, voices whispering from inside walls, and people with no faces dragging long shadows behind them. Sometimes, when he opened his eyes, the apartment would be different. The walls breathing, the furniture melting that a door would appear on one side. And when he opened it, he'd find a copy of himself, just standing there, smiling blankly. Then one day, the static on the TV changed and IT cleared. Jason sat, frozen, as a news broadcast flickered to life. It was real. It had a date. Today's date. He leaned closer. The anchor's voice said, "The search continues for local man Jason Lang, who disappeared without a trace from his new apartment last month. Police confirmed the building shows no record of apartment 6B ever existing." Jason's blood ran cold. They were looking for him. They didn't know the apartment wasn't real. He didn't even know what was real anymore. He grabbed the remote and started pressing buttons. The screen changed, but it wasn't news anymore. Now it showed a live feed of him. From above, he could see himself on the couch, watching the screen. Every movement mirrored, delayed by only a second. Then the screen glitched, and a new message appeared. Subject number 3916. Adjustment successful. Observation continues. Jason stepped back. Subject? Suddenly, the ceiling light blinked off. The air grew thick and heavy again. That a soft hum filled the room, like breathing, but mechanical. Then came the knock point, 3 sharp knocks. Jason slowly turned to the front door. The IT was unlocked. He hadn't touched it. He opened it, cautiously. Outside was a hallway, but not his hallway. Sterile white walls, fluorescent lights, security cameras, and at the end of the hallway a desk. Behind the desk sat a man in a lab coat, scribbling notes. Jason stepped out. No resistance. No monsters. No breathing walls. The man looked up, startled. You're not supposed to be awake." Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out. The man slammed a red button on the desk. A door opened behind Jason, and before he could turn, everything went black. When he woke up, he was in the apartment again. Everything normal. Lights on. Coffee smell. His phone on the table. The same notification glowing. Move-in confirmed. Permanent residency established. But this time, he didn't panic. He sat down, stared at the TV, and whispered, "I don't think this is an apartment." He understood now that he wasn't lost in a haunted place. He was part of something bigger, an experiment. A cage, and somewhere out there, others were watching, just like he'd seen, that he wasn't the first. He wouldn't be the last. But one thought kept looping in his head. What kind of experiment needs you to believe you're going insane? And more importantly, what happens when the subject stops fighting back and starts accepting the illusion? Jason smiled, then stared into the black screen and whispered, "I'm home."